Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to CHLY 101.7. I'm Kathy Holmes. I'm your host of Act 3. Super glad you've joined us today. In my Zoom booth, I have Julie Rushton, and we are going to talk today in this brand new year about something that so many women are experiencing right now. It's called menopause, and I know I'm definitely in the middle of it. I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of our listeners that are as well. Julie, welcome to the program. I'm so glad you're here. How are you?
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and talking about a subject that more women need to talk about, and that is menopause.
Yeah, it's like it seems to be that when I was coming towards menopause, I still could hear the echoes of my mother and my grandmother going, "Shh, it's just a little sweat," or "Shh, it's just a little redness. Don't talk about it." And what I found is that since most people go through so many different symptoms in their bodies that are leading up to menopause and then completing it, I think that it's important that we kind of break it open for people to really feel comfortable in what is a natural, organic part of the human experience. So, can you tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are around it? Are you personally going through menopause now, or have you just gone through it? What does it look like for
Yeah,
you?
so I think the first thing I'll mention is I believe that I'm on the tail end of it, but I don't know, and that's a part of menopause, not knowing where you are in this journey. And I come from a family that didn't speak about the hot flashes or the redness. It was quite simply just not a factor in any of our conversations. And
Yeah,
so, the first night I remember lying in my bed feeling this furnace kick on in my body and
right.
start to sweat and tell my husband I something's wrong. I think I'm sweating like crazy, and my mom had never talked to me about those things because you didn't talk about them. Now we talk about menopause and we need to talk more about it. That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here talking to you, is because women need to talk to other women. We need to learn and understand, oh, that's what you're going through. This is how my experience has been, and really learn and understand and be aware of the questions that we need to ask our medical health professionals
Yes, we
because you
don't
don't
need
know.
exactly. We don't know, and we don't need to go through this alone. You know,
Mm-mm.
like you, I feel like I'm on the tail end of it. But I truly wish that someone had given me some indication of what some of the things that I was going to experience were manifesting, in their way. Brain fog and soreness and aching muscles and all of those things, we attribute to other things. We don't necessarily attribute them to menopause. Can we
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about what some of those symptoms might look like for people?
So, one of the things I was reading a research article pre-Christmas, and it was talking about the amount of women who actually leave their positions during
Yes.
menopause. And
Yeah.
personally, I can tell you that the brain fog and the memory issues are real. And those are things that we really need to look at. What I'm hoping that we'll get out of this conversation today is really a sense of people understanding the brain fog, the
Yes.
joint pain, the memory loss, all of those pieces. Sometimes I hear women say, we think that we're going to be diagnosed with early set Alzheimer's, where it's menopause that's causing these problems in their brain. I don't have the solutions, but what I do know is there are a lot of symptoms women are experiencing, and there are options, but women don't know what those options are. And you don't
Exactly.
know what you don't know. So, how
Yeah.
do you know to ask those questions if it hasn't been raised to you previously?
Absolutely. And I think that, in reading some of the books that we are aware of, Christina Northrup wrote a very fantastic book all about menopause. She's written several actually over the years which have been helpful. But a lot of the time when you go in to talk to the doctor, especially if it's not a female doctor, respectfully, I don't mean anything against the male doctors, don't get me wrong, but it's almost as if they chalk up all kinds of things to other things rather than menopause, often putting people on depression medications and things like that. While they may have their
Mm-hmm.
place, but they put them, as a fix-all kind of thing for something that's actually going on in our bodies that requires a little extra support. So
Mm-hmm.
for myself, the brain fog is a huge one. And I do find that, I'm a busy woman like yourself, Julie. We both work full time. We both have a lot of things on the go, family and all of that. And I find for me, the brain fog piece alone makes me often question so many of the things that I'm doing on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious for yourself and for the women in your family as well. I know certainly in my family that's a common denominator, but in your family as well, has that been, something that is seen as a regular part of this, or how is it manifested in your world?
It's interesting. My daughter and my son actually just had a conversation with me and said, "Mom, we noticed that you're very forgetful,"
Yeah.
and so I had this conversation around this is something that is naturally occurring within my body, and it's something that we're moving forward on, and I have no control over it. The only control I have is to learn more. I can
Yes.
learn more about what's happening, and so brain fog has been a huge issue for me. It is something that had me very fearful, into the doctor, afraid that, something else was going wrong.
Yeah.
Um, Not something else going wrong, because nothing's going wrong. I'm going through a natural process.
Of
Um,
course.
but the brain fog is a big issue, and it interferes with your work and interferes in your personal life, and you're trying to run this busy life. Often women are at the height of their career when menopause happens. And then
Absolutely.
all of a sudden, brain fog hits and takes the winds right out of your sails.
Yeah.
So brain fog is something we really need to look at. We really need to understand more. And I have questions about what can you do about brain fog. So really looking after yourself and getting that sleep, talking to your healthcare professional, finding out about hormone replacement therapy. Is that something that people want to do? I'm just starting to learn about that. And
Yeah.
you hear scary thoughts. You hear from people that, well, does hormone replacement therapy cause cancer? Well, it doesn't appear to cause cancer if we add this other medication in. And so there's all kinds of pieces that people really need to have access to that information.
Information truly is power for
It
anything. And
is.
really, when we know more or we know better, we can always do more or do better as it goes. And certainly brain fog is a big part of it. But more than the brain fog and the forgetfulness side of it, it's the emotions that go with that. When you start to second guess yourself, when you're used to performing on a certain level and suddenly you're seeing yourself not performing in that way, it does a little something to your psyche.
And it does a little something, a lot. It does a lot to your psyche. And, I'm so concerned about my fellow women in my life and community members, and really wondering how many women are out there suffering through menopause
Yeah.
without the support of other women, without the support
Great.
of medical health professionals. And how many families are supporting women going through menopause, wondering, what's going on with my mom? What's going on with my wife? What is
Yeah.
happening? And so, it really becomes this big piece where it goes back to that information is power. But if you don't know that you need that information because it's never been a part of your life and you're not sure, that could be a scary place to be.
Absolutely. It can be a very
Scary.
scary place to be. And if you're feeling dismissed when you go to the doctor and you're trying to talk to the doctor about it, that complicates the matters a little bit more. I've
Mm-hmm.
been pretty lucky. I've had some wonderful women in my life. I'm sure you have as well. And I just remember my 89-year-old mother-in-law who used to tell me that, the moment when I turned 60, for several years before that, she kept saying to me, well, you're 50 now. Well, now you're 52 now. Well, now you're 54 now. Things are not going to look the same as they do. The older you get, the more you get. And I asked her about menopause. I said, well, how about those hot sweats? And she says at 89, she goes, well, Kath, she says, the truth is the hot flashes never really go away.
Oh,
And I said, oh, please don't tell me that. Please tell me something else. I don't, but she also shared with me that, she would put her head in the pillow. She would leave her boys. She had five boys and her husband at home. And she said she would leave the room and she would just go into another room and she'd put her head in her pillow and she would just cry and cry and cry and cry. And she never wanted anyone to see what she was going through. She was very stoic because, again, back in the day, you did not share this with other people. And so it became a really lonely place for a lot of women of a certain age.
right.
How do you think, how, I don't know about you, but I'm curious about how you've been processing your own menopause. What kind of
Mm.
or asks have you sought out to be able to help find some of the solutions?
Yeah, I have to say, and this is something I would encourage everyone to do. One of the most beautiful things that I did was I started having conversations in the workplace with my colleagues. And
Yeah,
we started talking about this is going on for me. And people started talking about what's happening for them. And so then we could really start to have a safe place to have some conversations and to do some gentle learning
yes,
from our peers, right? And really have that support. And so that was really important to me, and it really is backed by research. We need to be talking about menopause in our workplaces because it's affecting our
yeah,
work. And the other piece is, I'm going and having conversations with the doctor,
yeah,
and that was unsatisfying at first.
yeah,
And so then, really going back to other women, reading different pieces of research, reading books, talking to my own family, my mother, my grandmother, and just asking them, so here's what I'm going through. What did it look like for you? And so
yes,
really opening that conversation. And I have to tell you, both both of those women who are foundational women in my life, they took a second look when I talked about speaking about menopause. and
wow,
and
good for
and
them.
yeah, and then we sat down and we had that conversation, but it was nothing that was organic. It was I had to pull that information to get that information out of them. And so they were looking at stigma too. Let's reduce the stigma. Like,
Yes, 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 yes,
we
yes,
spend so much time um, supporting women in the early years in their prenatal and postnatal time, but we need to build in some menopause at the end of that cycle. Let's really look at how we support women there. What are the medications? What are the non-prescription kind of supports you can access? Doing things like yoga, practicing somatic exercises. Those are all really helpful pieces, but everyone is different in terms of what they need, right?
yes,
So it's
yes,
different what their symptoms are. It's different what will help their symptoms. Everyone has a different piece, but the one thing that is common is women talking to women. We
yes.
need to do that more, right?
And I agree with you. I think that the idea of putting it in the workplace, talking to colleagues about what they're going through and what they're experiencing, over the water cooler, as they call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of to open that up and feel that there's a safe place to fall where people can actually get some understanding and also to complement each other's work because as you pointed out so eloquently, very often people are right in the most lucrative and most important parts of their career. They've been putting in years and years and years and years to get to where they
Yes.
are. And then suddenly they're finding that there's gaps in their performance ability and just normalizing that everybody is going through this as a woman and everyone goes through days that are more difficult than others. While the experience may be different, there's still that thread of
Yes.
similarity.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what's your experience been in doing that? What have you found? How have you found your colleagues to respond to that?
You know, I will never forget. One of my colleagues, she perked up and she was like, "Please, let's have this conversation."
Right? Yeah.
And I could tell that the wheels were spinning after for her, where she was really starting to think, okay, I'm not going crazy, because we feel like we are struggling with our mental health because of all
Absolutely.
those emotions, because of the physical changes in our body. They all equal to this giant change, and it's scary. So I think that's the other common piece, is that there's a fear factor of women experiencing these pieces of menopause, but not understanding them and not understanding this is a normal process. But how do
Yeah.
we provide support to our symptoms?
Well, and it's also so subtle, right? It's like
So
one minute
subtle.
you're having a conversation with somebody, and the next second you're soaking wet and you don't understand why. And for a lot of women, especially if it's the early days, it kind of, I love how you pointed out about the pregnancy thing, but there was also those days when, as young women, we first got our period. Right. And those
Yes,
early
yes.
stages of teenagehood where some of our parents told us what was happening to us, and some of us didn't know what was happening to us. And it's the same sort of element. It came on all of a sudden. You knew that it was going to come because you heard through the grapevine you're going to
Yeah.
expect these changes. But when they actually occur, it's a whole nother animal. It's like, where'd that
Yes.
come from?
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but certainly in the early days of mine, the moodiness, I'm not typically a moody person. But in my early days of menopause, I found myself really being all over the spectrum. And that's why when you
Right.
talk about mental health, it makes sense, is because I recall
Yes.
specifically kind of being all over the map. One minute I was happy and joyful, next minute I was going to, kick something, right? And not being a violent person at all. I found it weird that I was behaving in ways that I just
Yeah.
don't typically behave.
Yeah, I have to say that I think through my 40s, there were times where, I like how you talk about, and I've forgotten the words, even though you just said them. But I like how you talked about it being so subtle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because those changes are subtle. And then all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden, you're experiencing those subtle changes more often. And so
Yes.
then you kind of go, okay, what's going on? And I can say that through my 40s, I think there was mood changes throughout the whole time. I was on antidepressant medication. And I'm not saying that people, I want to be really clear with this. Mental
Totally.
health is a very real piece of our life, and
Yes.
so depression is not to be confused with menopause.
Mm-hmm.
And if you receive information from your doctor, please take that medication.
Of course, of
Um,
course.
but the symptoms mimic one another.
Yeah.
Depression, those mood changes, the highs, the lows, all of
Yeah.
those pieces, and our hormones are fluctuating. The other piece that I found hard in my journey was I would go to the doctor, and he would sometimes say to me, we can do a test, but if I test your hormones and they're at one level, the next day they could be at a different level. And
Exactly.
so it was really hard to get a clear answer if I was going through it or not. And so it only came a couple months ago where my doctor said to me, your count is showing that you are postmenopausal. But really, Kathy, he didn't explain to me, what does that mean?
Exactly. Yeah. So it
Right?
left you kind of questioning once
Yes.
again, yet another. Yeah.
Yeah. What does
Yeah.
that mean for my hormone levels in my body? What does that mean? Do I need to look at hormone replacement therapy? I don't know. And so that's where, that information is power again. So I've had to really be careful and mindful about coming away from my doctor's appointments, thinking about what he said and going back. And some
Yes.
women are afraid to go back and ask questions, but it's very important. This is we are our only self.
Yes.
We must look after ourselves. And so to do that, we need to ask questions. And we need to know those questions to
And
ask.
and further, it's self-care.
It
It's
is
it
so
is
self-care.
it's people talk about self-care and they've been saying, well, I don't really know what to do for self-care. I mean, going to the spa is not the answer, or I can't take this time away from so and so or so and so, you know, where self care becomes the burden. But in actual fact, if you don't know what's going on in your body and you can't put your own oxygen first, right? You
Yeah,
can't support
you
somebody else
can't.
properly. So you wouldn't be able to answer your daughter or your son when they said, Mom, hey, what the heck is going on? Because you don't have that information. And so
Right.
you're right. You're absolutely right. It's so important, crucial, in fact, to do that self care and go back to
Yes.
the doctor and ask any question. There are
Yes.
also other places that you can check out. So if
Absolutely.
you know, just to be aware, if you are, you know, in our community and you are curious about, you know, how to get some assistance, there's lots of assistance available within the community itself. Most of our agencies, you know, within community, we, you know, are so wonderful at advertising the kinds of things that they have available. Counselors can also be of value for some people
Hmm.
if needed, and certainly if it's something that is of benefit. And also just calling nurse practitioners. I think I'm not sure what the number is for nurse practitioners, but I think it's 811,
Yeah, I
uh,
believe so.
where you could call the nurse practitioner in the emergency line and just say, I've got some questions and my doctor's not giving me all the answers that I need. Is there a way to help out? So I think that it's important that as we talk to community through this program, that we are able to share that there are resources available and certainly to reach out whenever possible. And we'll see,
Hmm. Hmm.
direct you into the right place. Um, when I think about, you know, the body changes, one of the things that stands out for me has been the sudden weight gain as well.
Oh, yes.
You know, for a lot of people that are going through menopause, part of the change includes that ability for our whole hormonal system slows down to such a degree. So we can no longer take in the same caloric intake as we once did. I don't know about you, but I gained a few pounds for lots of reasons. That is happens to be one of them. My favorite excuse, of course, is it's menopause. You know, let's have a giggle with it. If we can blame it on something, why not? Right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, did you find in your family and the women that you know that they also had experienced that big fight with weight changes?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My grandmother didn't really experience that, but definitely my mother and myself both have. And what I find interesting, and when I did some research on it, I got a few answers, or one answer that appeased me. And one of the things that happens is our fat is actually redistributed in our
Yes.
body in a different way. And so it
Yes.
comes and sits around the center. And so, that is really difficult to navigate as well, because you're going, what the heck did I do to create this?
Yes.
Um, and then the other piece that you're really looking at is then it causes additional worries, because we know that carrying extra weight around your midsection puts you at risk of heart disease. And so
Yes.
then you have that continued worry. So it's like the cycle just continues on and on and on. And
Well, and the
so,
stress hormone, the cortisol that comes into our belly.
yes,
So we're stressed out about what's happening. We're starting to get fat. So we get stressed about that. And so we're just
yeah,
adding to the issue rather than letting
yeah,
it go and recognizing that this is an earned right that we have as women
yes,
to be
yes,
able to truly love ourselves in a way that we may not have experienced love for ourselves
yeah.
before.
Hmm.
And to be okay with the fact that a couple of extra pounds are not going to kill us, right?
Yeah,
It's just the way it
yeah.
happens to be for a period of time.
It just is the way. And I think you're right. I think that's important to recognize too. This is for a period of time.
Yeah.
It's not something that goes on forever. We do come out the other end. It's just a matter of how do we provide support to one another, and how do women find that support if they don't have companionship in their life that has experience. So, that's why it's so
Yes.
important that we have these conversations, Kathy.
I agree with you, and I think our audience will agree as well. I think that, you know, we don't talk enough about these kinds of women's issues, and yet, you know, we represent over 50% of the population, and so we do really need to have this very deep
Yeah.
conversation. And while we may not have the answers on today's program, just the opportunity to open it up for review and reflection does a miraculous amount of good for sure. I learned a
Absolutely.
lot over my menopausal time. I learned that I could focus on focus my energy in different places, and I found it to be rather freeing.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been something in your experience that has really risen to the top as a direct result of menopause?
Yeah, I think one of the things that just for myself that I've struggled with throughout my life has always been that body image
Mm.
and wanting to look like the magazines and the TV shows and those pieces. And so throughout my life I've really been working on I am me. I am beautiful the way I am
Yeah.
and I want to continue to grow and develop as this human being in our world. But at the same time, um, and here's menopause again, Kathy. It just hit me. I just lost my train of thought.
That's a perfect thing for this conversation because that's the stuff that makes me crazy. It happens to
Yes,
me all the time. I'll be in the middle of it and then boom, it'll fall off the map.
yes,
I think of
yes.
it, a friend of mine teaches all kinds of stuff for Alzheimer's disease, right? She, for years and years, has been working with Alzheimer's. And she did a description once and she called it the Swiss cheese, where sort of the thought goes into this hole and it's jumping up and down in the hole, trying to get itself out. It eventually gets out and then it goes on to the next hole only to do another dive. So
Dive.
I
Yeah.
totally am with you on that. Where we were going with the train is the learnings that have come,
Right.
specific learnings that
Yes.
might have happened for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so through that journey of really trying to look at my body and trying to just be okay
Yeah.
and actually more than okay, happy with who I am. And one of the things, it's been a struggle. I have to say, there's been some weight gain, and there's other reasons as well, but the distribution of that weight has shifted right to my stomach, and that's where it likes to be. And you know what? That's where I am today, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
And it looks beautiful on you because I know that our radio listeners cannot hear. Of course, our YouTube listeners will be able to see how beautiful that you are. You are
Oh, thank
stunning,
you.
stunning human being. And I honestly know deep in my heart that menopause looks amazingly beautiful on you.
Oh, thank you.
So,
Thank you for
we're
that.
there.
And
It's,
I feel, it's something that I'm sharing. I have a 17-year-old daughter,
yes,
and I realize that throughout my life I've been struggling with my own body image, and I really want her to know, hey, this is who I am today. This is exactly where I am, and this is okay, and you're okay too.
exactly. And there's also that piece that during different stages of our life, our bodies do different things.
Yes.
We need to celebrate our bodies for being the miraculous, wonderful things that they are. You
Mm-hmm.
know, very much like you, I have this vision in my head, or had at one time. I don't necessarily subscribe to the same vision now that I did not that long ago. Is that I do not feel like a heavy set woman. I am a heavy set woman. I do not feel like a heavy set woman. When I look in the mirror and I feel myself on the inside, they're not congruent. I do not feel like I'm overweight in any way. And yet, when I go to the store to buy my clothes, I see myself in plus sizes, right? And so my inner glory and my external glory are not the same.
Right.
Good news is that what I found because of menopause is a new appreciation for the fact that while my body is doing all of these wonderful things, it's been the mother, it's been the worker, it's lifted stuff, it's moved stuff, it's been able to, sustain difficult things. I have and many of my listeners know, I have an autoimmune disease. I'm constantly fighting that disease and that condition. And so with all of those things, I'm just so grateful that my body is allowing me to continue and to keep on going. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
women who are experiencing menopause, you know, some people call it their identity crisis. And I would like to reverse that narrative and take identity crisis and put it identity successes, identity growth, identity
Yes.
beauty. Shift that narrative from it being, oh my goodness, what's going on, to holy wow, look at how life can be when I'm comfortable in my own skin, no matter what the size, no matter what it's doing. Right?
Right. And I can't leave this moment without telling you, Kathy, what an amazing and beautiful human being you are as well.
Oh, thank you.
And
It's so
and
kind.
I'll echo that as well, that menopause looks good on you. And you emit something that women need. You emit that exploration of learning and that passion for understanding and being content. And that's really important that we share that you can feel those things. This is a natural part of life, and we're successful because we're going through this natural part of life, right?
Exactly. Just
And
going through it at all is the celebration, right? It's
yes,
so many people don't get the opportunity even to get this far in life. So the good news is we
yes,
this great opportunity. But I also want to stress in that opportunity that growth happens because we're taking the time to do exactly what you said when we started. Let's unpack it. Let's get the knowledge. Let's figure out what's going on so that we can be more confident in our skin.
yes, because we deserve that.
Oh, yes. Hallelujah. I agree.
Yep.
We do.
Yep. We
Absolutely.
deserve that. And we deserve that because we're human beings.
Because we're human beings. I'm just going to take a quick station identification, and then we're going to come back to this conversation.
Okay.
We're about halfway through, so I like to kind of go there. So if you have just tuned in, thanks so much for tuning in to Act 3 on CHLY 101.7 FM. We are delighted that you joined us every Monday at 1 o'clock. And of course, if you missed this episode, we are super excited when you go to our YouTube station, Act 3 Media Productions on YouTube, and or you can also listen to us on iHeart Radio and Spotify. This recording will also be a part of that network. So please make sure that you check back, especially if there's something that you hear that is really interesting to you that you want to follow up on. It's always good to listen to the program again. I also want to remind you that our latest edition of Act 3 on Now Rogers, what was once Shaw, is now Rogers. It will be airing this week. We can't wait to share the groovy stuff with you that we've got as far as our guests are concerned. There's some amazing information there. So do make sure that you tune in. And always, I'd like to remind our listeners that we are now in winter. So this is the time of year when we need to give our neighbors a little extra love. If the weather has turned on us, and you know, in this moment it's okay, but maybe sometime during this week it won't be, please do make sure that you check on your neighbors to make sure everybody's doing okay, especially the older adults in our neighborhood. The best thing that we can do to keep our neighborhood safe is to make sure that our loved ones within the neighborhood are feeling safe as well. And for those people that may be struggling, please know that there are warming shelters available. So please utilize those shelters. And for our community members who want to contribute, we always appreciate it when you assist anyone within our community that can use an extra coat, a pair of boots, a pair of mittens. Please do make sure that if you see an opportunity to give, that you consider giving to the charity of your choice. Again, I thank you for tuning in to CHLY 101.7 FM. I'm returning to our conversation with my dear friend Julie Rushton, and we are talking all things menopause. Menopause was such a scary word when I was 20. Now that I'm a little older, not so sure how much wiser. I'm feeling that this is a pretty cool place to be, despite some of the side effects like memory loss and, you know, the hot flashes and all of that. I'm reminded about a dear friend of mine who was really going through menopause in the very early stages. She'd gotten through perimenopause, which is the menopause before the menopause. It's sort of the prequel. And, you know, all of a sudden her face got so red and she just poured. She
Mm.
absolutely, her hot flashes were wicked. Um, I get that at nighttime, but during the day, not so much. I didn't really, go through too much of that. Julie, have you experienced those hot flushes in the daytime? And have you found some sources or any rationale to help make them less challenging through the day?
I've only had one hot flash during the day that I recall. And they're easy to recall because it's like turning on the furnace. And I was at a large community meeting and I was facilitating, and I had to go through a hot flash and facilitate a meeting at the same
Oh my,
time. And it was something that I don't ever want to do again.
I
Most
understand.
I'm very fortunate. Most of my hot flashes came at night.
Yeah, mine too.
And so, I was fortunate in that way. But I hear from women, they experience them all the time during the
Yeah,
day. And
yeah.
how do you really support someone through that if we're not having the conversations to know that that's happening for someone, right?
Yeah, and while I think most women have heard in one form or another that menopause is coming, you can expect that it's going to come, but we don't wrap our head around it, right? Like we
No.
don't really wrap our head around it until we're in the middle of it, and then it's suddenly, it's not something to be feared. It's just that I remember my first hot flush, I was scared to death. I cannot deny that. I was like, what on earth is going on? And I'm ripping my clothes off, thinking, I've got to cool down. I'm like ready to run outside buck naked in the snow
Yes.
because I'm like, this is insane. But I find now if I do have them in the daytime, it's more of a flush.
Right.
It's not quite the same. If I have a glass of wine, I never used to have this, but if I have a glass of wine now, it will flush. My face will instantly go red.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can no longer, and red wine gives me a terrible, terrible headache now. So I've noticed that there's like lots of changes in the way that my body processes, wine or other things. I mean, it can even happen with juice for that matter. It doesn't have to be wine. It can
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
base will sometimes give me a bit of a flush where I never.
Yeah.
But again, I'm on the tail end of it. So things have changed from where they started to where they are now. There was a
Yeah.
that point, and then it seems to have subsided quite well at this point.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. One of the big things that I experienced was a lack of sleep. So,
Mm.
really having a hard time with sleep. And, one of the things we know is that people must have sleep to function at their best the next day. And so that has probably, aside from the brain fog, that's probably the second largest issue that I've
Yes.
experienced through menopause. And again, not knowing that these things might be coming my way, when they
Yeah.
come your way, boy, I didn't sleep very well. Gee, I'm not really sleeping that well. And then all of a sudden you think maybe something's wrong. And then someone might say something about menopause, right? And that's where having those conversations and keeping them going really can support us, because we need to talk about these symptoms. They're also different.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
they're all.
excuse me, I find that the sleep issue is an important one for people to recognize because
Yes.
when you're not getting enough sleep, then you're compounding one problem on top of another
Yes,
problem on top of another problem, and that makes it even more difficult. How do you
absolutely.
how do you think that we could as women, how do you think that we could regulate and turn this into a normal conversation in the workplace? I think, full transparency, you and I are quite lucky because we work, for a for the same organization.
Yes.
Um, so transparency, we're very blessed in our organization that we are able to actually have these conversations. But there are a lot of companies that are large companies as well, where there's just no place and no time for these conversations to take effect. How do you think we could change the narrative around that to make this more comfortable for people to talk about at work?
Yeah, I think the more we do, shows like Act Three, where we
Yeah,
talk about it,
yeah,
the more we encourage women. When you're sitting at the coffee in the coffee break room, and you're sitting with another woman, or it might be a partner who's not female at
yeah,
work, and you need to just talk. So if you have those relationships where you think that you're safe enough to say, I'm really going through something here
Mhm.
and I'm struggling. And, I think just having that support will really make this better.
Yeah.
And as we have more communications, as women come out and start to learn more and say the M word, so we're
Yeah.
talking about what menopause is, my daughter will learn that so that when her
Yeah.
daughter gets up to the age of menopause, she'll be comfortable having these conversations because it's a normal thing to do. And so I think it's generational, and I think it's
Mhm.
switching that stigma by having conversations and by encouraging those conversations to happen out in community as well. So
Exactly.
for women we need to stop being embarrassed that we have brain fog. We need to stop being embarrassed that, man, we only slept 3 hours last night. We're exhausted today, right?
Yeah.
We need to stop thinking that we need to be superheroes, that we are just
Yes.
human beings and we require sleep and we
Yes.
require certain things to function. And if we're struggling, we're not functioning to our best capacity. And so I think it goes back to that relationship piece again, having conversations in community, having conversations in your circles where you are. And these, I understand that it can be fearful to have these conversations. I'm terribly afraid that someone's going to find out I have brain fog at work and think that something's wrong and
Exactly.
that I can't do my work. And so,
Exactly.
I think that that's something that we need to be really honest about
Yeah.
and understand. And the more we do that, the more the stigma will get reduced and we'll have more conversations and it will become a regular part of conversation, just like prenatal. What was your prenatal experience? We talk about that all the time, but we
Mhm.
don't talk about our menopause experience.
Yeah.
I don't, and so we need to get into having those conversations and making it a regular piece of life.
I think on top of that, like I agree with you 1,000%. I think that the more that we have the conversations with everybody, regardless of the person that we're with, I think that men need to understand as well, what we're
Absolutely.
going through, because I think that it just, while men go through different things. I just last week I had Peter Hudson on, who's a local comedian. He's just a riot, but he works with mental health and addiction, and he and I got to a point where we were talking about, men go through suicide more than women do at certain times of year. There are
Yes.
issues that happen for men not being able to cry, and those that do cry, there's that old stigma that went with it, and very much like we're talking about today on menopause, we were talking as well about that stigma of men being strong. Well, part of that is us being more honest with them to tell them what's going on in our
You're
life. So,
absolutely right.
like we need to break not just this stigma, but all of the stigmas that go
Yeah.
with personhood.
Yeah.
There's just so
Yeah.
much right now that we have to be responsible to and for, and there's so much bad stuff going on in the world, that bonding together in kinship and talking about issues that are in relation to our experiences is always going to be something that's worth doing.
Always, always. And, that's something that, we've often spent time talking about, even in our family, is kind of, when we have young men and then they grow up to be men, and then all of a sudden we think that they have to be tough. They don't need to be tough. They need to be a human being. And
Yes,
that's what women need, is another human being to listen and be supportive. And so even if they don't have the experiences, they can still be that support person in your life. And it's
absolutely.
so important that they are not afraid of menopause either. So we need to have these conversations. So you should be a fly in the wall at my house sometimes for dinner because I'm like, we're
I
going to
love you.
talk about this.
No, but I'm glad because you were on the Act Three program on Shaw or Rogers now during our winter program, and we were talking about the period promise, right? We were
Right.
talking about, how your son became almost the poster child for doing the right
Yeah.
guy by buying feminine products and placing them in his bathroom so that when women come by, which I have to tell you, from a teaching perspective as a mom, I just want to go kudos, kudos, kudos. I bow to you. I bow to you. I bow to you. We need to have more of those kinds of conversations. And
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're just not happening enough on the kitchen tables where they need to be happening. We need to be able
Yeah.
to get this information. So thank you so much, by the way, for doing that, and for raising your son to understand the importance of being,
Mhm.
you know, to having a woman in your life means supporting her, and support might look like this.
Yes.
And as she
Yes.
gets older, support will look like menopause for a
Yeah.
period of time. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we've hit on something that's really important is that this is, women can share their experiences, but and their heart, and women and men can really share their heart and support as well. And I
Mhm.
think that's really important because when you look at and when we say a woman like myself, I do have a partner who's able to support me, but I need to ensure that he has the tools he needs to support me. And that's where that whole reducing the stigma, doing the research, learning about it. And we're even starting to see, at the Comox Valley, there's a gynecologist, Tracy Rogers is her name, and she is doing a show called Menopalooza. And it's
Oh,
all
yes.
about menopause. And so, I've sent her a note and said, we'd love to have you in Nanaimo or Port Alberni or Parksville,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come in and have this talk. And she uses humor to really explain the changes that are happening in your body and what that might look like and how it's different for everybody. And so,
Yeah.
I think the more that we can have those conversations, we can have presentations, we can just immerse ourselves in that learning, then the more successful we will feel as we journey through menopause.
Absolutely. And I think today some of the key takeaways have been really surrounding about opening yourself up and allowing yourself to have the conversation to begin with. That's the first step right away, because then you're opening yourself up to that knowledge. You're asking the questions, you're looking for options and finding solutions, because there's a lot of information out there that's available. Not all of it is going to work for an individual. And I also want to point out that today's program isn't about finding specific tools for dealing with menopause, but rather the menopausal conversation in its entirety. Just the fact that we're talking about brain fog and hot flashes, and that it's, that it happens to women at a certain age and that we all go through it, is so important for our audience to understand, right? It's just that that to get the professional help that you require means to do that research and find the right doctor for you, find the natural path for you, find the expertise is out there, so to start looking for it. But just even knowing what to ask, like what is it and why is it, and can we avoid it, can we get out of it, do we have to have
Yeah.
this happen? um
Yeah.
and the reality is yeah, that's kind of part of the journey of every female, is, and I also know of many people who have suffered. We've had people on our program that talked about endometriosis. We've had people talking about having full hysterectomies. We've had people talking about, all of these very serious and important reproductive conversations. Menopause is just another portion of that reproductive whole cycle as part of our humanity as
Yes.
women. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is. It's part of a natural cycle. It just so happens we don't know a lot about that natural cycle
Yeah.
when we start to go through it, and that
And
is the
everyone
problem.
goes through it so differently. There's no,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
it's an individual experience. How yours went for you and how mine went for
Yeah.
me will be similar in some elements, but vastly different in overall
Yeah.
patterns that are happening,
And
for sure.
and I have to say too, one of my hopes too about reducing stigma and raising awareness would be that our larger systems can really look at it. So,
Yeah,
one question I have is how much time is spent learning about menopause when a doctor is in university or in the resident program?
sure.
What amount of time is spent on learning about menopause? And maybe we need to focus some energy there so that more learning happens, just
Yeah.
like people specialize in prenatal experiences, people can specialize in menopause. And so, where are those people?
And if the people exist, which I'm sure they do,
Yes.
are we able to access them in a way that makes
Yeah.
sense? I mean, that's one of the things I love about the Zoom conversation is that we can now have conversations with people that are not necessarily living next door to us, but can be
Yeah.
insightful and be able to share the information. So our circle of influence 20 years ago and our circle of influence today is vastly different. So we
Yes.
can find out more. We have the opportunity now to learn so much more by just doing a deep dive in self-care and finding out what is it that was going to work for you, because for some
Yeah.
people naturopathy works fantastic, for
Yes.
other people hormonal replacement works fantastic, for other people still yam cream works amazing. Like there's lots of different things that are out
Yes.
there for people to consider, but it starts at knowledge. It starts at understanding that this
Yeah.
is what happens to every woman at a certain age. And that age, you notice I said at a certain age and didn't exactly give a specific one, because for some people, it's mid 40s. I think my son figured I was in menopause from the time I turned 30. That
Mm-hmm.
was the joke of the family. It's like, oh, it's
Right.
menopause. Oh, mom, you blame everything on menopause, right? It
Right.
was the joke of the family because I knew that it was coming. I knew that
Yes.
it didn't come at 30. It came in
Yeah.
I was in my mid 50s when it came. But at the end of the day, like that, just some of the coping mechanisms, I was sort of pre-setting it and didn't even realize I was pre-setting it. Just by
Right.
making the joke so young in his life, right? Mommy
Good
can't
for
remember
you.
everything, right?
Yeah. Good for
Yeah.
you for having that conversation and preparing them for what's coming. Right.
Hey, I took it from you. You're the woman. You've been doing this long. It's important. So we're nearing the end of the program. We're not at the end yet. We've got a few more minutes to go, but I wonder if we can sort of think about in the next couple of minutes, sort of narrowing down some of the key things that we would want our listeners to know about as it relates to menopause. So first of all, the fact that there are lots of different symptoms, and we named quite a few of them off: brain fog and such like that. But beyond going and getting the knowledge, what would you think would be like one of the first things we can give our audience as a tool to sort of help them go through those first few days of finding themselves in an unknown territory?
You know, I think what's really important is for people to know that it is called menopause. There is a
Yeah.
name for what you are experiencing, and these experiences will vary. Here are some, I think people need to know here are some common
Mhm.
scenarios of what people experience. And then I think it's really important for women to know you are not alone.
Yes,
You are
so
not
important.
alone. There are other women that really want to sit and have this conversation with you. So find your woman, find your partner, find your male, whoever it is that you can sit down with and have this conversation about what you're experiencing. It doesn't mean that, it's the end of your career. You're not going to be, anyway, there's so many different things that we worry about. And
Yes.
I think it's really important for women to know you're not alone.
Yeah.
We are experiencing this. Um, and
Yes.
all women go through menopause
Yeah.
regardless. It's something that we journey through. And so I think when you know that you're not alone, I think that takes the scaredness, like the
Fear
frightfulness
factor.
away from it, the fear factor away.
Yeah.
And then once you've peeled that layer back, you can really look at then here are my symptoms. Okay, now what are some ways I can support myself to reduce the effects of these symptoms? Because we can't take them away, but we can navigate with them. We can buy special sheets for our bed that help us when we sweat a lot. We can sleep with our window open. We can have a fan. We can practice really good health. We can use things like you mentioned, yam cream. There's all kinds of options out there for women to learn about.
Mhm.
I know this much of them,
Yeah, no, I
right?
hear you. Yeah, exactly. We're not the experts of it. We're just two women that are actually trying
Yes.
to practice what we are hoping to preach, right? Is for
Yeah.
everybody just to open up that conversation and open up the dialogue. Is there anything in particular that you've learned specifically yourself about your experience with menopause? Like, what have you learned about you in the
Yeah.
that,
I have to say, what I mentioned earlier was something very powerful for myself. And that was, really struggling with that body image. And something just shifted. Something just shifted in the last year or so that just went, for my health, I want to keep an eye on what my weight is, but I'm okay. I am
yes,
me.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
this is who I am today. And I hope that that's okay because that's the way it is.
Oh yeah, there's no question. It's not, I hope it's okay. It's absolutely a
Yeah.
1000% okay just to be
Right.
who you are in your
Yeah.
moment. Yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
think that's a gift that menopause, I don't
Mhm.
know how it came to me, but the journey has really come to this point where I am who I am. And
Yeah.
I'm grateful for all my experiences that have brought me to this point in my life, both positive and negative, because all of those experiences have equaled who I am today.
And who you are is pretty darn spectacular, if I do say so
Ah,
myself.
thank you. I
I
think the
just
same.
I love the fact that you were willing to come today to talk about such an important subject. We're at the end of the program, and I hate being there already. It feels like you and I just started the conversation,
Yeah.
already closing it off. But, and of course, I always ask, all of the people I have in the booth with me to share with me what their takeaway message is for people. And so while you do that, I'm just going to do some closing here on the show, and then I'm going to come back with your final question of, if you had the opportunity, right? Like if there was something you would like to leave as a message and a closing thought, what might that be for you? So before we do that, I'm just going to say again, thanks everybody for tuning in to Act 3 on CHLY 101.7 FM. We love it when you tune in. My show is just one of the many, many wonderful programs on CHLY 101.7 FM. And downtown Nanaimo, we love you. So we're super glad that you tune in whenever you can and all across Vancouver Island. And to all of our listeners for our Act 3, whether it's on iSpot or iHeartRadio or Spotify, or whether you're watching us on YouTube, we thank you so much for being part of our weekly experience. So thanks again for tuning in. Julie Rushton has been in the Zoom booth with me today. We've talked quite a lot about menopause, a little bit of brain spots that happen for us. I know it happens to me all the time, sometimes in mid-sentence. And so I'm so grateful to have been able to share this with conversation with my friend Julie. Julie, thank you again for being with us. As I said just before I was starting to close off, if you could have a takeaway, what would that look like for you?
My takeaway from today is more of a, a request to the viewers. And that request is really about talk about menopause,
Yeah.
talk about what you're experiencing. We know when you talk about what you're experiencing, that can alleviate a lot of stress just in itself. Just by
Yes.
having that witnessed and acknowledged, talk about that. You are not alone. There are places that you can go, women's groups that can support you in terms of your journey through menopause. Where those women's groups are, I don't know that they're large groups through organizations. I think they're women who meet for coffee, women
Yeah.
who go for walks together,
Yeah.
women who are in the coffee break room together at work. Have those conversations and then just be grateful for who you are because you are beautiful people. Every single human being is a beautiful person and be grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my takeaway, yeah, that would be my takeaway, Kathy.
Julie, that takeaway is perfection in itself. I
Mm-hmm.
love just the idea that we are sharing with our community the opportunity just to sit back and listen and be supportive to another person, be somebody's ear, and just be there, just be present in that moment. And so thank
Mm-hmm.
you so very much for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the program. I look forward to talking more about menopause with you back at the office when you and I get there. In the meantime,
Perfect.
thanks for opening this up so that we could have this conversation. I'm just so very, very grateful. Have yourself an amazing day, everybody. everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Ad 3. And again, we'll see you next time on Chili Radio. Bye for now, everybody.